So, have you ever looked at a really successful business and just wondered, how do they deal with the fact that everything eventually just wears out? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on two concepts that are absolutely essential for that: depreciation and provisions. And trust me, this isn't just boring jargon. It's the language that really shows you a company's financial health and its plan for the future.
Okay, picture this. You've just spent a ton of money on some brand new, state-of-the-art machine for your business. It's perfect. It's powerful. But here's the kicker. The second you turn it on, its value starts to drop. So how do you actually plan for that? What's the game plan for this slow, steady decline in value?
You know, it's just one of those facts of life in business. Stuff doesn't last forever. The delivery van, the computers, the heavy machinery, it all has an expiration date. Now, a smart business doesn't just sit back and hope for the best. Nope, it plans for this decline. And that brings us to our very first big idea.
All right, to make all this a little less abstract, let's create a small, ambitious coffee shop. We'll call it Grind and Go. They've just made a really big purchase that is, frankly, the heart of their whole operation, and we're going to follow them to see how this all works in the real world. So, Grind and Go bought this beautiful, super fancy espresso machine. That's what we call a tangible asset. Now, depreciation, it's just the official way of spreading the cost of that machine over its expected lifespan. The key words here are systematic allocation. This isn't just a wild guess, it's a planned, regular expense that shows how the machine is losing value bit by bit, year after year.
So how do they actually figure this out? Well, the most popular way is called the straight line method, and it's pretty much as simple as it sounds. First, you take what the asset cost. Then, you estimate its useful life, like how many years can you realistically get out of it. And finally, you just divide the cost by the number of years. It's a really simple, consistent way to plan for it.
Let's run the numbers for our coffee shop Grind and Go. The espresso machine cost them a cool $10,000. Their accountant figures, it'll probably last about 5 years. So $10,000 divided by 5 years, that's $2,000. And that right there is their annual depreciation expense for that machine.
And here's what that looks like on their financial statements. After the first year, the machine's value on the books is down to $8,000. Year 2, it's $6,000. And so on, all the way down until it has zero book value. Now, by recording this $2,000 expense every single year, Grind and Go gets a way more accurate picture of their real profit. And get this, it's also a financial strategy, because that expense lowers their taxable income. Pretty smart, right?
Okay, so we've got a handle on how to plan for the predictable breakdown of physical things. But what about the parts of business that are a little less predictable? Another fact of life is that sometimes your customers just don't pay you. So how does a smart business plan for that?
So, Grind and Go did this big catering gig for a local company. They sent over a $500 invoice. The coffee was a huge hit, but weeks go by and crickets. That payment is still missing in action. This brings up a really important question. How do you account for the very real chance you're just never going to see that cash?
And this is exactly where something called a provision comes in, specifically a provision for bad debts. It's basically an educated guess, an estimated amount a company sets aside because they know from experience that a certain chunk of their credit sales just won't ever get collected. You could almost call it the accounting version of being a realist.
Now, it is crucial to get this. This is not just a random guess or some kind of pessimistic attitude. Companies don't just pull this number out of thin air. They dig into their own history, their own data, to find a reliable pattern of who doesn't pay. It's a data-driven estimate. And in fact, financial analysts keep a close eye on this number. If you see a company's provisions suddenly spike, it might be an early red flag that their customers are in financial trouble.
So, after looking through their books, Grind and Go figures out that historically, about 2% of their invoice sales, they just vanish. So based on that data, they create a provision. By doing this, they're making sure their financial reports are way more honest because they're acknowledging a likely expense right away, instead of getting blindsided by it down the road.
Okay, now this leads us to something that trips a lot of people up. You hear the words provision and reserve, and they sound like they do the same thing, right? Just setting money aside. But in the world of accounting, they mean two completely different things. So let's settle this once and for all.
So what is the real difference? I mean, if you are making a provision for a bad debt or you're putting money into a general reserve, you're setting money aside either way. But the answer to this question tells you a ton about how a company thinks about risk and plans for its future.
This chart lays it all out perfectly. A provision is a charge against profit. You're using it to cover a known liability, like those unpaid invoices. It's an expected cost you have to account for. A reserve, on the other hand, is an appropriation of profit. That means you've already figured out your profit, and now you're choosing to save a piece of it for something more general, like a future expansion or just a rainy day fund. See the difference? A provision is a necessity. A reserve is a strategic choice.
I love this quote because it just nails the difference. Think of it this way. A provision is like boarding up the windows because you can see a hurricane on the weather map. A reserve is like building your house with a stronger foundation just in case a storm ever hits. One is for a specific, likely problem. The other is for general, long-term strength.
So why does any of this actually matter? Well, because once you really get these concepts, you're not just looking at a boring spreadsheet anymore. You're actually reading the story of how a company deals with risk, how it manages its valuable assets, and how it's planning to navigate the future.
So let's just wrap it all up. Depreciation? That shows you the true hidden cost of the tools a business needs just to open its doors every day. Provisions? They give you a much more honest, realistic picture of a company's actual profits. And reserves? Well, they're a huge signal of financial strength and smart, long-term thinking. Put them all together and you get some powerful clues about how well that business is really being